I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Hi, I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and today I'm speaking with Rob Fargo and his cat. And Rob, you're a sociologist who's spent a lot of time working in K through 12 education, and you offered to discuss some of your experiences and thoughts with me, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'll start by reading something that it was posted as a comment that I just got. So I felt like it was really apropos of this conversation. On my channel. Someone said, "Hi, Leslie. I love your channel and have recommended it, but I don't listen to all the episodes. I recently resumed my education career in a very liberal district where DEI and anti-racism is still being pushed. I love teaching children to read and want to navigate this tough environment while keeping my values. When I left my career in 2022, I had been going nuclear on the DEI people, and that isn't sustainable. Are there any episodes that deal with strategies for independent-minded educators to get through the madness?" And so perhaps this might serve as something of what this gentleman is looking for, and maybe not. So I'll just open it up with that prompt and then throw it back over to you.
Well, I would say to this person that you're not alone, and there are a lot of people who have kept quiet or have held their tongue for years because they did not feel like they were going to be listened to. And we're seeing that with parents and the way that parents have been treated in school district board meetings and in policies that school districts develop. We're seeing that with the actual staff and the teachers. At my district where I was working, they offered an incentive for people to leave due to budget cuts, and far more people, I think it was about 25% more people ended up leaving than they expected. And they took that as a positive, and they put that into the press as being something that they were excited and proud of. And I thought to myself, are they even considering what the reasons are why some of the people might have left? Because yes, a lot of them were planning to retire or considering it, but then there were other people who left for other reasons. And it's hard, and it's hard to continue. And I think that for me, at least in my career, particularly when I was working with students, when I was teaching community college, I felt like there are tens of thousands of students who are passing through here every year, and I'm not going to be able to reach, more than a small fraction of them. And so that was at least my hope, was that while I was in the classroom and while I was working on the things that I talked about in my syllabus, I was going to do my best to present things in my way and to be liberal-minded in the old-fashioned sense of what being liberal-minded meant, and to model that and to encourage my students in that way. And I think that that is still possible. It may not be possible to go on, anti-DEI tirades or to, totally denounce the head of the board or something like that at the place where you're working. But at the same time, there are things that we can do that can encourage students, at least encourage this next generation coming up to try to see things from multiple perspectives.
That's a good answer. Can you say a little bit about what got you involved in public education? What inspired you to do that work? And And also, how did you experience it over the course of your career? Did things change quite a bit, or has it been pretty stable?
Yeah. Well, for me, I I grew up Catholic, and I think that that had some influence on me at least. I don't remember there being, talk about anything as far as the kinds of people that Jesus or God would want to be served, other than the people who were the less fortunate and the poor. And I think that sense of justness probably inspired me a little bit. When I was going to college, I was studying English. I was thinking of becoming a writer. I wanted to bolster my writing abilities in college, and I joined AmeriCorps the first year that AmeriCorps came out. So that was 94, 95. And the program that I happened to work for was working in the public education. It was working in the public schools in Cleveland. I'm from a working class suburb of Cleveland, and so I joined that program, and I think there was a sense within me that was thinking, I want to do something good. I don't know what exactly it will be, but let me try this and just see what it's like. And I really enjoyed my time there. It inspired my career, and I saw some of the social problems that you see in inner city. And this was, in the 1990s in the Rust Belt. And I would go on to move to California and to see other types of things in public education as well. But what I really started to think about or to base my career around was the idea that all of our kids deserve a decent education. Very, very simply, not with a whole lot of complexity at that point, but it was just that these kids were just like the kids that I saw in my neighborhood and just like the kids I saw in the wealthier neighborhoods. They just had a different type of a background and they had different challenges. And I had these touching stories, about some of the kids. I remember an after-school program where I was working, and there was a kid who really, really, really wanted me to meet his family. And I thought, I don't know if I should do this, and I probably shouldn't have. It was like just like a dumb young person who's thinking that he's going to be idealistic and show up at this kid's house. And what I learned, sort of floored me how, nothing negative happened to me, first of all. That's the first thing. Even though this was in a neighborhood that was far from where I grew up and was not familiar with. But it was just this sense that people who are different from one another in terms of ethnicity or in terms of religion can still be neighbors and can still be warm. And I was just shocked at thinking, why is he so welcoming? And but like over the course of the next few decades, I think in our country, there definitely has been at least somewhat of a change where we become a lot less welcoming of what we might consider to be strangers in some respect. The people who we perceive as being different from us, perceive as not just being from a different neighborhood or having a different religious belief, but people who we suspect have a different ideology. Because I started to see it at the places where I worked, where in theory I would have a lot in common with those people who I was working with, and yet, the suspicion and the trying to out people or find the people who were not the true believers was disturbing indeed. But over that course of my career, where I started off as a tutor with AmeriCorps and went on to become a teaching assistant, went on to work to run tutoring programs, work as one of the managers of some tutoring programs. Eventually, I decided that I was going to go back to school and to earn a degree so that I can teach in a public community college. So, my path led me and continued to lead me within public education there.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. You describe this kind of this based on your faith upbringing, you had this desire to help people who were less fortunate. And your own experience when you went into the home of the student and you had this kind of realization like, hey, these are just normal people, just kind
Yes.
of doing their thing in a different context, but still just human beings like the people that I spend time with. And what I'm reminded of is this, like there's this caring impulse, this nurturing impulse, and the dark side of that is what you see with the social justice movement. Like the flip side of the coin of nurture is control.
Mm.
And so the same sort of mental mechanisms that we use to underestimate people in order to think that they need our help are those that allow us to dehumanize people who think differently from us and try to alter their thinking. And so just kind of your story illustrates you having some of those realizations for yourself about the nurture impulse and perhaps a way in which it undervalues the agency or the value of the other, the innate capabilities of the other.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And if I were to go back to when I first started AmeriCorps, I remember my mother saying something along the lines of, you shouldn't pity people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a young person, I remember thinking about that, and it had stuck in my head as to what exactly does she mean. Instead of asking, I should just ask her. But I figured, let me wrestle with what this means. And I think what it meant was that we should try to see people and their groups that they come from or their backgrounds or whatever in their entirety. Instead of seeing like a set of people as all negative or all positive, or idealize them or make them seem like they're worse than they are. And this is where I think it goes beyond our politics. It goes beyond being, like a Democrat or Republican or conservative or liberal. It's just understanding things like, if I had kids, for example, I just have cats, like this cat in my lap right now, Ace. But if I had kids, I think that's one of the things that I would try to teach them is, don't believe the kinds of things that you will sometimes hear, in the classroom or on the playground or wherever. It's like there are good and bad people from all different backgrounds. So, being of a certain night, and when I say good and bad, that's a shade too. That's not something that's so clear cut as, like good versus evil. And that is one of the problems, I think, within the social justice movement, is that it has a tendency, I'm not saying that it's everyone, but it has a tendency to see things so black and white when they really shouldn't be. I mean, as an example, when I was working in California, after I had moved out to California, and as I said, I was working as an AmeriCorps tutor when I was in Cleveland, but when I moved to California, I found a job that supervised a tutoring program, and we had tutors that were in 15 different schools, and these were schools that had been identified by not by me, and actually I don't even think it was even by my supervisor, the director, but they had been in neighborhoods that they thought there needed to be this tutoring presence. I don't think they had done any testing to see if their reading scores were bad. They just thought this was where we should put them. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it was a political decision. But I remember, first of all, trying to bring the tutors onto a little bit of a, I guess you could call it like a field trip, in order to drive around and look at each of the schools. So one of the first, and kind of learned this from my dad, I suppose, but it was something where I thought, the first thing that you have to do is to get off the freeway and drive on the streets. Because when you're on the freeway, you can't see anyone except for the other drivers. You can't see the neighborhoods. You can't see what's there or what's missing. And so I said, let's drive on the streets. And the AmeriCorps members I was supervising said that they didn't like this idea. But nevertheless, I was just trying to orient them and myself. And I remember going down to one of the neighborhoods where we were working was quote unquote South Central LA. So, if you were raised in the same age as I was, if you had heard about South Central LA from whether it was from movies or whether it was from the news, you would think that this was the most terrifying place on earth and that you should never, don't set foot there even if you live there. It doesn't matter even what color you are or anything. And what I saw, to kind of correlate a little bit with what we had done in AmeriCorps back in Cleveland, it was like houses, people living their everyday life. They're trying to pay the bills. They're going to work if they can. They're trying to get their kids an education. Now, it's easy to idealize that and then like to start assuming that, oh, there's no crime there. There's no need there, that would exceed kids who come from any other neighborhood. And I found out, relatively quickly, my supervisor told me that he said, be careful when you park outside of this school. He goes, I had my car stereo stolen there 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. So again, it's kind of like this, trying to see this entirety of, there are good people and there are people who are having challenges and they live in the same neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And they have, there's a lot of nuance that we would need, but I would think that if you are, and to go back to the point, if you're someone who is a teacher, or I would say even more importantly, if you're someone who's an administrator or a school board member, you've got to be able to see the entirety. And I think that we often have a problem where there are people who are running for school board, there are people who are being chosen as superintendents of K through 12 districts who they've never done this before. They do not know. All they know is based on early stereotypes and maybe a short amount of time, just barely getting off the freeway exit to go to a meeting at that school and then getting right back on the freeway and leaving. And so their sense of what it's actually like for the people who live there and for the children who live there is skewed. And often it's skewed just by what they expect going in, so they will see what they want to see. If they want to see something that's negative and they want to assume the worst about the kids, they will have evidence. And if they want to assume the best, they will also have evidence. And so, there needs to be some kind of a better exposure so that we don't end up with leaders who are basically just basing things on stereotypes, basing things, and again, it could be this stereotype of assuming that everyone there in this neighborhood is great and they don't have any criminals or they don't have any problems. Mm-hmm. It really has to be balanced.
Yeah, I've wondered quite a bit how much these problems that we're facing right now, these sorts of, I guess, identity politics type issues, are a product of scale and centralization, and the fact that it's impossible to really hold the full complexity of other people at that kind of scale. You really, there's the concept of Dunbar's number, right? Which is, I don't remember exactly what number it is that we're supposed to be able to actually know. And beyond that, our minds and our social evolution isn't such that we can really completely empathize and understand people in larger groupings. And right now, my own experience as a parent with kids in the public school system was that the best experience that my kids had in a school was the smallest school. Mm. And it was not the most economically successful school. In fact, it was a really poor district and a a very poor school sitting on the side of a highway, surrounded by apartment complexes, right next door to a strip club that had been grandfathered
Wow.
in. The distance laws didn't apply because it had been there for so long. There were almost no fathers. It was all single moms raising their kids, and just an impoverished school. But there were like maybe 500 kids in this entire elementary. And so the principal and the teachers knew all of the families and children. They were able to know everybody.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of empathy there. And even in some of the wealthier school districts that that my kids went to, because they went to a couple of different schools, the size mattered a lot. And I think that this kind of flattening that we do when in the name of social justice, which I've accused of being just applied demography. It's just a bunch of racial and sociological stereotypes that are being applied broadly. And then the way that we're thinking about these people is reduced down to these things that you're right. If you take this sympathetic angle and you think, oh, these poor people in X population have been oppressed, and that's why they are, having these poor outcomes, then we are the white knights who come in and try to equalize for that.
Yeah.
But if you think that they're criminals and it's their own fault that they're having XYZ poor outcomes, then you have a very different stance. And the reality is that both are just perspectives. Both are just different angles on the same situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it reminds me of some of the things that have become maybe a little bit more visible lately, or talked about a little bit more lately, when it comes to how public schools deal with behavior issues. And I know at the district where I was working most recently, the data to me were shocking, and perhaps to no one else, perhaps to everyone else just expected this, but basically they wanted to, I guess you could say, ignore. I mean, that's the way that it came across to me. Wanted to ignore the kinds of things that were happening in the classrooms, not to suspend children. That's the trend, to suspend them less and less.
What kind of things are you talking about? Like violence or talking back to teachers? What kind of things are you talking about?
Everything. I mean, the kinds of things that I had a colleague who was in charge of keeping data on this, and some of the things that were happening in the classrooms or on the school grounds would make your hair curl, as they say. And it's hard to imagine that these are things that, for kids, I mean, this is K through 12. I mean, these are kids often in middle school or high school, and sometimes even elementary school, violent, sexual, a variety of different kinds of offenses. And
there's no punishment.
The punishment is, I'm not going to say, because this is not my area of expertise. I don't know exactly how the schools handle it. I know that there would seem to be a lot of pressure, and the school districts seem to be proud to say that the numbers of students who are being suspended is decreasing.
Oh.
But I also, as I said before, I think there are a lot of employees who also leave because they do not want to be told, you're not going to have support from the office if you try to take students out of the classroom. You're not going to have support if you want to try to suspend a student. And so what the suspensions are being replaced with, I'm not 100% sure. I know that some of it is probably being handled by what they're calling restorative justice, which seems to be a way of talking through the things that have happened. And part of the issue is, of course, when you remove a child from the learning environment, from the classroom days, they're going to learn less. They're going to learn less of the textbook things. They're going to perhaps learn something else that's not going to be quantified, but they are going to learn less of what's in the classroom. And, so it's not like it has an easy solution, but I don't know that there are a lot of teachers who are excited about the way that this is it's being imposed on them, basically. I don't think this is coming from teachers. This is being imposed by the people who are running the districts.
So that's one of the challenges that you see right now in
Oh, absolutely.
education. Is
Absolutely.
increasing volatility or misbehavior among students and a decreasing, I guess, limiting the tools that are available to teachers to protect the peace of the classroom.
Right. The peace of the classroom, the integrity of the teacher's body. I mean, there's stuff flying across the room, but
Wow.
the reason behind it has more to do, I think, with equity than it has to do with, suddenly the district wants to suspend fewer people.
So if it's a student from a considered oppressed background, there's less likely to be any intervention allowed.
I think that that's true, but it's more about the numbers in the aggregate at the end,
Okay.
than about the individual situation. But I don't know. I mean, there has to be some kind of a conversation that's had at the school level where the principal is explaining the policy to the teachers, and I don't know what the principals say in those conversations as far as, encouraging or discouraging. But I do know that what they don't want is to have the numbers at the end that they have. And so if they have these numbers at the end where it seems to be disproportionate, so let's say that, and you could pick whatever, ethnic group or whatever. I don't think it has to do with any particular ethnic group. It's just that they don't want it to be disproportionate versus whites. And so if the white students or perhaps the white and the Asian students add up to, 60%, and the other set of students who are remaining make up 40% of the school or the classroom, but I think it's probably more at the school level, then they're not going to want for more than 40% of the suspensions or more than 40% of the write-ups or however they handle it to be to the minority groups. They don't want those numbers. They often feel, and this goes across many different things, including the way that hiring is, kind of under the radar being done, is that they want the numbers to be exactly the same, exactly representative of the community or exactly representative of the school itself. And so doing that is a type of social engineering that has been, that's basically impossible. But that's what they're going for. That's what they're going for, whether it's at the school level or whether it's at the district level. That's what they want to happen. That's what they would brag about, to say our suspensions are exactly the same and our hires are exactly the same as the percentages of ethnicities or races that are represented in this community. And then they would presumably rest. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. They would have accomplished what they needed to accomplish and could rest.
That is really discouraging to hear. That is really what a. I mean, it's just fraudulent at that point. You're massaging your numbers into some kind of quota system.
Well, it's the scary thing of having worked in research on data. This is my most experienced thing that I've been doing in terms of working in public education has been as a researcher. And you learn to take things with a bit of a grain of salt. And even at my level with my expertise, they actually don't want my analysis. I'm no longer working in that position, but they didn't really want my analysis. The analysis is going to come from the people on the top. So they don't, even if someone is hired as an expert and someone has the experience to do this, they don't
want to see their own numbers analyzed.
Right. But I mean, let me tell you, I'll give you an example, a specific example. And this was at an earlier job that I had, and I had the opportunity to sit on several interview panels. And I had done this before. As I mentioned, when I worked for the AmeriCorps program that was in Los Angeles, we hired, I guess if I were there for 3 years, so we hired about 150 people. So I have a ton of experience in doing interviews. If I'm not one of the people who's designing the questions, I'm sitting there and asking the questions, and we're discussing the merits of each candidate and how well they match up to the requirements and all that sort of thing. And so I take this job, and this is years later after that AmeriCorps program experience. This is, 20 years later almost. And we all sit down at the table. There's probably about 12 of us in there. And we were going to be hiring someone who was going to be the one of the deans, basically, at the college. And the person who's running the search panel is another dean who would be even above that one. So she has, the power in this situation to kind of guide us or direct us or whatever it may be. And so after we all sat down, the dean said, we're going to have a short presentation from Human Resources. So Human Resources came in, and they had slides that they put up on the screen. And the first slide said, and it was basically something that came out of the policy that probably all districts are required to use when they're going to hire someone. And so it's that blurb that you'll see at the bottom of job applications and such that talks about how, we follow this policy and we will not discriminate against anyone. And then they delineate even the groups that they will not discriminate against. This was, however, not the end of the presentation. Interestingly enough, the presentation continued, and the people from HR then put another slide up on the screen. And on the left, it showed the demographic breakdown, and this is in terms of race and ethnicity, of the employees for that school district. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, it said, this is the demographic breakdown of the communities that we serve.
Oh, wow.
And then that was the end of the presentation, basically.
Oh, wow.
And so then they took it off the screen.
That's a giant nudge.
And they left. And so I looked around the room at the other people, and some of the people on the panel, they were barely paying attention. Mm-hmm. They had already heard this sort of stuff before, and this is at least what I surmised, that they basically had heard this sort of stuff before, and they're just waiting to, let's interview the people, come on. And then there were a couple other people who were waiting patiently, and so I raised my hand, and I asked the dean, I said, so does this mean, what does this mean? Does this mean that we're supposed to discriminate? I said, I realize it says that we're not supposed to discriminate against people. Mm. And I said, but does this mean that we're supposed to discriminate in favor of certain groups? I said, just as an example, let's say that there's someone, and I didn't use race, I used ability, disability, but really, it doesn't matter, because if you are going against this rule, you're going against this rule. So I asked, and maybe I said the quiet part out loud. You're not supposed to ask this question, and I think I became a marked man at that point. I did lose that job eventually, by the way.
Oh my gosh. So you just said, what is this video indicating we're supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with that information?
Yeah. And so what the dean said was, well, let me tell you that we are not going to discriminate in this interview panel, and we are going to hire the best person for the job. Let's get started.
Uh-huh. Wow. So it sounds like a giant social experiment.
It really was. And there is a exciting ending to the story, which is that later on, after I had been released from this position, after this dean had moved on to another college, she had been hired to be, I don't know what the title was exactly, but I know I'm pretty sure that she was like a president, if she was not the assistant president. She ended up becoming investigated by the faculty senate at that college, and she was ejected for trying to rig their hiring.
Wow. Wow.
In other words, it can, I guess what I'm trying to say, the moral of the story, I suppose, for me is that, first of all, that those kind of things go on. They definitely go on, and they've gone on in multiple interview panels that I've been a part of. in one way or another. But secondly, it is actually possible for places that have the ability to fight back and the ability to raise their voice. It is possible for people to get rid of the bad apples. But I think in too many cases, this is probably not happening. I think that just like the folks that were in that interview panel who were kind of just like holding their head down or, looking on their phone or whatever they were doing is just business as usual. This is just what they expect. They know that they're going to be pushed to hire, whatever the appropriate group is that they're trying to expand their demographic proportion of.
Yeah, and I think that goes on in lots of places in lots of ways. And I remember something that really shocked me when I was younger. I was in my 20s. I was working at a medical group, and the administrator was a friend of mine, and she was in charge of hiring. And she shared with me that we were looking for a new X-ray tech. She said, we won't hire any women of childbearing age.
Oh my gosh.
It's just we just won't. We're a small company. We can't afford to have somebody who's just going to get pregnant and go on maternity leave. And so she was only interested in hiring either it would be an older woman perhaps or a man for that job, but no women of childbearing age. And I was really stunned. I mean, she and I were both women who would have been in that category ourselves, and it was overt discrimination. And when I asked about it, she's like, how are you going to do that? She said, we'll find a different reason to reject a candidate. Would never be that explicit about it, but we just won't. And so I know that must go on. And this kind of nudge that you guys received through the video is like, we're not going to, like you said, we're not going to say the quiet part out loud. We're just going to do things to manipulate you. But if you call us out on it, on the record, we're not discriminating.
Right.
And it's just, that is, I guess you could make a case for small businesses. There's the whole counter to the anti-discrimination laws and rules that say that we should have the freedom to associate and choose who we want for our family business, for our small endeavor. But when you're talking about public schools, you're talking about the government. You're talking about something that's taxpayer funded. Yeah. It's a different kind of animal.
Right. And I think I'm probably not alone in this, but I think I probably idealized that a little bit to begin with, in my career, thinking that because it's a public institution, we could hope for more, more justice. We can hope that it's going to be a place where discrimination is just simply not going to be allowed. But instead, I think it's done in unfortunately, it's done in more covert ways, and people are afraid to talk about it.
Well, I think when I think about the public school system, first of all, I hated my experience in school growing up. Really hated it. It was terrible. Yeah. I went to awful schools. It was just, I could probably sit here and just talk to you and rant for an hour about how awful that was. Yeah. But I know there's a wide range of experiences that people have. But one of the things that comes to mind right away for a lot of people with public education right now is gender ideology and how that has been introduced to a generation of young people through school. We went from schools should not be allowed to teach sex ed to sex ed is part of your health class to the genderbread person. And I know it feels like gender stuff has been only injected in the last 5 years or so, but I brought this up to my daughter a while back, and she's 27, and she was taught the genderbread person when she was in health class in high school. So that would have been like at least 10 years ago. And so this is something kids have picked up socially through peers and through the internet, but mostly I would say through education and through teachers and school clubs inviting kids to think about sex and gender in a particular way. And since it's coming from an authoritative source, education, there's this powerlessness that parents have to counter this when it comes home with their kids.
Yeah.
And I wonder what are your thoughts on how that got started, what you've witnessed, and where you see it going and being right now?
Yeah, this is a tall order, and it's something I'm very interested in. Well, having studied sociology in the, I guess we call them the aughts.
Mm-hmm.
Is it aughts or knots? I always forget.
I like aughts.
Yeah. It was present in the academic literature, and but it was still in, I would say, somewhat of its infancy. And so a lot has changed in, 15, I would say 15 years, perhaps 10 years. And well, one of the things that I was trying to think about how I wanted to discuss this earlier was, if you were to pull up to the school district where I most recently worked, one of the first things that you'll see hanging outside of the district office is a set of flags. So it's not just the American flag, and it's not just the California flag, which are there on a flagpole, but now there are, I don't know what there are at this moment, since I haven't been there in a bit, but there are three to five other flags that are there. And it seems as though when there's a new group that the district wants to make sure that they demonstrate their that they are accepting of, they're going to put another flag up there, so it will look like the UN eventually. Mm-hmm. But at this point, it will have Black Lives Matter, which implies the organization, so that one is peculiar.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that there's one for the Native American tribe that had been in this particular area centuries ago. And I think also there's one for, I think there were two for LGBTQIA. I think one of them was for Pride Month, and then there was another. My point in saying that is that seems to be, I mean, I don't know how much I want to oversell it because I was not working in the schools, but to me, the way that it seems is that this has not just become a priority for our district and probably many others, but that it's actually one of the main things that they're trying to get across in the package of public education, in the curriculum that they're delivering. And if it's not in the, I know that it's in the curriculum, but it's also surrounding the kids on a day-to-day basis. And so when I would walk up the stairs in the offices, in the district offices, there's a display case. And in that display case, and often it went well beyond Pride Month, there was something that was in there that had either a bunch of books or a bunch of posters or a bunch of, sometimes they look like placards that were things that were coming from a protest that were in favor of LGBTQIA rights or identity. Some of the books that I saw there that were in the display case are also ones that I would be curious to take a look at before I had that offered to my child if I had a kid. Where does it come from, or how exactly did it make its way into the school? All I know is that when I was a grad student, I remember taking a seminar in sociology of education. And I was excited about it. This was one of the areas that I was focusing on. And I was disturbed by the amount of groupthink in that classroom. And this is in comparison, I'm thinking, to the other seminars or other courses that I took. In particular, the sociology of education one, there was not a lot of difference in what the folks there were arguing or what they brought up in the class. And some of it, I think, they're trying to impress this professor. The professor was someone who's somewhat prominent in sociology of education and also in public education in our area in general, because he was at the heart of starting a school here, kind of like an experimental school. But nevertheless, at a certain point, after, like a week or two of being in that classroom, I started to, I mean, it's weird to imagine because I'm not like this constantly, but I mean, I started to troll the other students to get a rise out of them because it was so easy to figure out what kinds of things they would get upset about. And you would think, in graduate school, it gives you a chance to try out ideas and to kind of like pose questions or to say things. And, you could say, I'm just gonna, wing it here for a second and just see what you guys think. And I would have no problem getting all the getting all the other students riled up about some idea that I proposed. It wouldn't even necessarily be something I believed, but what I saw was that even at that point, so they're not even at the elementary school. They haven't been hired to be a assistant dean or to be some kind of anything, whether it's at a K through 12 district or at a community college or at a college, any kind of school leadership job that they were aiming for. They're not even there yet. And they're already, in my opinion, in my observation, they're already believing a lot of the same things as one another. And I think that if you've seen, I don't know if you're familiar with that horrible sociologist Charles Murray, and I'm joking because apparently if you get canceled for writing something a long time ago, then you have nothing else or no other insight. I find that completely false. One of the things that he argues in Coming Apart is where he's talking about how similar and how like solidified and separate from the rest of society a lot of the upper middle class has become over the second half of the 20th century and moving into the present, that people just simply believe the same things without questioning, and they don't know what other people believe. And so when it comes to the gender ideology, I think that there are some people who are seen as the thought leaders, I suppose, when it comes to this topic. And if we specifically focus on K through 12, that there would be either someone from the Department of Education or someone who's the superintendent of a prominent large district in the country who comes out in favor of, let's say, they're going to include more LGBTQ things within the curriculum, that's something that they're going to push for or advocate for, that suddenly the herd just follows completely without asking questions. And maybe I'm just not privy to the place where the questions are being, where the discussion is actually taking place. But it always seems to me that some of these things are happening so fast that you're wondering, where does the public, like the regular person, the person from the community, the parent, where do they get to weigh in on this? Because they're really getting, I think, whiplash from the way that some things all of a sudden have what comes across as 100% approval. Mm-hmm. Whereas I would have no doubt that there are people within the LGBTQ community who don't support this, who don't mm-hmm. support the way that the education system has, driven down a very specific path. At the same time, it is really important for us to welcome all students. This is part of what public education should be. But the way in which we do that and the way in which it enters into the curriculum is a separate question, or like it's a different part of the question. And I think if we question the way that things are being done, sometimes the way that it comes across to someone like me is that, suddenly we are being called a transphobe, or suddenly we're being called homophobic or whatever, or we have some kind of internalized problem. And it's like, well, no, what we're talking about is a policy. Mm-hmm. Policy is something that can change. You can change, like if we're talking about the policy of how we're going to address the problem of homelessness, there's an infinite number of options. So if I say that this one option, this one way of treating homelessness, or this one way of discussing gender in elementary schools is not the best way to do it, it doesn't mean that I don't think that we should be helping homelessness, or it doesn't mean that I don't think we should be discussing gender in schools. It's just that particular policy is perhaps not the best way to do it. And working on that, that's one of the things that, outside of gender ideology, that I feel like we really need to work on when it comes to education, which is trying to get away from this good versus evil, black versus white. There's only one way to do this, and if we don't do it, you're a racist or a transphobe or you hate women or whatever it might be. Is that we have to look at things as there are a lot of options for us, and it's okay for us to disagree to come to a better way of dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and it seems like it's a particularly slimy ad hominem attack because what we're talking about is not necessarily arguing that schools shouldn't be welcoming of all students.
Right.
Should you really be generating these ideas? Should you really be in the process of inculcating and introducing ideas to children that they wouldn't have thought of previously,
Right.
and then pitting them against their parents?
Right.
And for them to say, well, you're just a transphobe, we are welcoming, is it's crazy. And when you're describing the groupthink and the whiplash, that really resonates for me. I think that I haven't read Coming Apart. That sounds really interesting, but it seems like something else has come apart too. And it's what's being taught in K through 12 right now. I don't think most parents are in support of a lot of this. I think most parents think that this stuff is pretty radical and has gone too far.
Yeah.
And so how are we living at a time when most families are sending off their kids to be educated with educational curricula and policies that are so divergent from their own values?
Yes. I think that, and if I went to one of my takeaways, or one of the things that I hope to get across, is that we need to increase transparency of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not from one ideological perspective or another. It's just that people don't know. Mm-hmm. They simply don't know what's going on. And then they're ending up losing control of their kids in some ways. And even if you don't have kids, I personally, whether I have kids or not, I care a lot about what happens in the schools. Mm-hmm. The people who are children right now in our schools are the ones who we're giving the world to them. Like they are going to be taking care of us, and they're going to be taking care of the world as we get older and when we're gone. And so we really should have some kind of understanding and input into the way things are happening, and not have it based on mistrust. I mean, like I'll give a couple examples. One of them perhaps relates a little bit more to the pandemic, and the other one has to do with kind of like these gender forms that are happening in districts. And the first thing that I noticed during the pandemic was that there were a lot of people who wanted to participate in board meetings to give feedback. And I understand that nothing like this had ever happened before. But what happened was that the board started to restrict the way that public input would be taken. The amount of time that people would be able to speak was cut lower and lower, and you had to sign up ahead of time. So the idea that it's this public meeting where the people from the community and the parents are going to have a voice. I mean, at some point you would be restricted to 30 seconds.
Wow.
So I don't even know how you're supposed to, well, I'm long-winded, but I don't know how you're supposed to get anything across in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of a mistrust, or not valuing what people were going to say. And usually the way that it was framed at these board meetings also was that there would be no reply from the board. So it's kind of like if they could just steel themselves for the 15 minutes and just like listen to all the
Wow. We're going to do the most radical thing we've ever done and send all of your kids home with a laptop, and then we're not going to let you talk about it. And we're not going to talk to you about what you feel about it.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that in that way, that only pushed, the public school leaders and parents apart at that point. And now we have the situation where there will be data that will come out from basically activist organizations. It'll be an advocacy group for trans people, and they will say the percentage of, or the number, sometimes it'll be an estimate. It will often not be an actual count. It'll be some estimate that's developed from something else. And it will say that trans students are much more likely than other students to take their own lives, or they are much more likely for their parent to kick them out of the house or to abuse them. So this is coming from an advocacy group, and some of it might well be true.
Well, and it also begs the question, do people who are deeply emotionally dysregulated and have a lot of other social and personal problems, are these people also more likely to be drawn towards gender ideology?
And that
so it doesn't answer.
That usually is not in their advocacy group presentation. But yes, but I think what happens next then is that, and I think that I'll give an example. I was just signing up for health insurance, and I saw something that said you can sign up for your account if you are over age 14. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? And there are these forms that in some school districts that the child will fill out to say that they have a preferred name, perhaps. That's not the name that they have on their school records, or that they are would like to be classified as non-binary, or that they would like to be classified as a girl instead of a boy, or vice versa. And this is a form that I didn't know existed. So in my personal responsibility at my last workplace, I would look at all kinds of student data, because that was what I was asked to do, was to compile reports on various things. And so I would look at everything, including date of birth, including zip code, including their race and ethnicity, including all of their grades. This is what school districts have now, and it's used, in good faith in order to help the students and to understand if programs are working and such. But I did find it interesting, especially because the Office of Civil Rights had asked us in previous years that they were going to start asking us for data on our non-binary students. I found it interesting that it came out in the media locally here that our district was gathering data on this set of students, and some of them perhaps were trans. Trans was actually not one of the categories on the form. It was more of children who wanted to be known by a different name, or who wanted to change the gender as it was listed in their account for their teachers to know. And that was apparently being kept separately somewhere. And so I raised this question with my boss to find out what was the deal with this. And the way that I found out about it was because there was an article, and apparently this article was from a conservative I don't know if it was a television station in town. And immediately it was, I got all of this pushback from one of my coworkers and from my boss, because I had forwarded something from this outlet. And I said, I don't even know what the outlet is. I found it on Google News. This is basically just, I didn't know that the form existed. I said, we're doing research here, And it seems like it would be helpful if the people who are researchers at our district would at least know that this exists. And isn't this something that the district would be curious to know? To know what are the educational outcomes for children who have elected this, and do they need more services? Do they need fewer services? Do they would there be any way that we can support them? But the data was kept separate, and so I asked my boss, where are they keeping the data? If it's not in our databases, where are they keeping it? And he mumbled something, and my thought is they're keeping it on the administrator's floor in a locked filing cabinet, like a piece of paper, in a paper folder, like they would have done with spy secrets from the 1970s or 60s or something.
Wow, that's just wild. Is it being kept, I'm wondering if it's going under the guise of healthcare and protected health information, if that's something that's kept out of your database.
That's possible. We did have some types of data, like the diagnosis if there were a student who was identified as needing special education services or had an IEP. We did have that data, and we use that in our research. Yes, it's possible. I'm not entirely sure, but I found the answer strange, and I thought to myself, there's a lot of mistrust that seems like it's being sown by the fact that we can't have transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like those of us who were in my position, it's like, tell me who all the trans kids are. No, it's not like that at all. It has nothing to do with that. It's if you're doing research on an educational system or on a school district, you want to know how to best serve your kids. And these are our kids too.
And it's hard to say this, I suppose, for people who want data analysis, you'd need a longer way to spell this out, but it seems so just maniacally evil to introduce ideas that make children uncomfortable with their own body and grasp onto new identities, and then hide that from the people who know and love the children best.
Yeah.
And continue to manipulate these kids in this way and not give parents no transparency. I knew a family who did not know that their child was seeing a counselor, not a school counselor, but a mental health therapist that was funded through their district, that their child was actually seeing a contracted mental health professional, had a diagnosis, and the therapist had introduced the idea to the child that maybe his problems were because of his gender identity. And so now he was trans, and they didn't know this for about 6 months until they found a piece of paper that informed them that some change to the way that this was funded. They had no idea that during school hours, their kid was seeing it there. So this stuff is I don't know. It's turned me into a bit of an anti-school radical at this point, honestly. I mean, my kids are homeschooled, and I don't see how I would ever trust this system again.
I can understand. It's sad, and it does go along with, I guess, from the sociological perspective, how Americans are losing faith in their institutions in general. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's because of things that would be considered progressive, or other times it's because of things that are conservative in perhaps some way that's seen as extreme. But it really is a shame, if you're a parent. I mean, I have a trans friend whose parents were very supportive. And, having conversation with the parent, I'm sure, is very, very challenging. One of the most challenging things that you can go through. But assuming that the parent is going to hurt their child, that is really what this form seems to me to be about, is that because of the activist groups who are saying parents kick their kids out when they're trans, they're implying that this is happening every single time with every single parent. And I understand it. If you're from an activist or an advocacy group, you want to make it look like there's a problem. That's part of how social problems are constructed. You're trying to encourage this to be seen as a problem. And I do think that it is a problem for many families, but again, a little bit of nuance. If you are developing these policies, these secretive policies, and if the parents don't feel welcome in the district, if you're doing multiple things that make them not feel welcome or make them feel like the kinds of debates that are being had don't seem to relate to my kid. Like if your kid is a white kid who's getting A's and B's, they're not paying attention to your kid. If your kid is an Asian kid who's getting good grades, they're generally not. And I know my answer, or where I'm coming from in this, is I've seen what the district administrators request when they request data. They are interested almost 100% on learning gaps. So what that means is that if, imagine this, if you had white or Asian students who tended to be in our district, and it changes a bit from year to year, but tended to have the highest, let's say, graduation rates or something like that. If those numbers were to actually fall and they were to meet the other minority groups, it would be seen as a success. It would be seen as a success because the learning gap was gone. And to me, that is absolutely bizarre. For public education to work, you have to really feel like every child is getting a chance and every child is receiving services, and that they're not giving the impression that they really are just trying to help one set of kids and not others. So yeah, this mistrust of the parents that seems to have been planted really needs to be fixed. There need to be ways, and like I said, I think the ways of doing it have to do with transparency and explaining what things like equity mean. That's another one that I can go on and on about, but I don't want to make your show too long.
Well, it seems like it kind of comes full circle to one of the first anecdotes you shared, which was about a desire to help people and how that can become entangled with a fundamental underestimation of the people that you seek to help.
Yeah.
There's this helper mindset, which is I know what's best for you. Yeah. And I think we're dealing with quite a lot of that, and we're seeing that more and more. And what you've just shared today, it helps a lot in terms of transparency. I think that it's tremendously eye-opening to have someone coming out of that educational sector and talking about what it looks like on the inside. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I do also feel like I could take you on many different tangents if we had more time together. I would love to hear more specifics and also more of your general analysis of what's going on.
Well, sure. Anytime, I'd be happy to discuss these things, and try not to have a heart attack when I'm doing it, because it is difficult. There's a lot of pressure to keep those things quiet and to keep them secret. But I really think if we're going to improve our public education system, that we have to have more open discussions and to have more transparency.
Yeah. And that nervousness about saying something that's going to be unpopular, kind of, you've come a long way from when you were trolling people in graduate school, but it sounds like being a free thinker is a part of who you are.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Well, Rob, thank you again so much for your time today. Do you have any kind of online presence that you want to point people to?
I really don't.
Okay.
I might have something a little bit more in the future.
Okay.
And I would just say if I'd be happy to discuss things with people in the comments or wherever it might be. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your time, and this has been really informative. And please, anybody watching who wants to leave a comment for Rob, please do so. And yeah, thanks again, Rob. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.